Hunt. I've been a curator in the Department of Paleobiology since 2005. Now, my talk title sounds very broad, Evolutionary Patterns in Fossil Species. But I'm talking about a very specific situation, one in which a paleontologist has tracked through time a particular species and measured some aspect, some trait, some feature of that species. These are two examples shown here. Time is on the horizontal axis. Now, these sorts of data have been very important for us paleontologists trying to figure out what, at the broadest level, the fossil record has to say about how evolution works. But it turns out interpreting these sorts of data has been very controversial. And the controversy actually goes all the way back to Darwin. So Darwin felt that his theory of evolution by natural selection required that we should see gradual step-by-step transitions between species. The fossil record of the time offered no such transitions. And so Darwin was faced with an apparent contradiction between what his theory predicted and what the fossil record seemed to say. He sided with his theory. In fact, there's a whole chapter on the origin of species about how crummy the fossil record is, and therefore doesn't offer any really strong objection to his theory. So if we were to summarize Darwin's general worldview, it's somewhere on the left side of the screen here. This is a chunk of the tree of life. Each branch is a species. Time goes upward, and the horizontal axis represents some aspect of morphology we've measured, the traits or features we're looking at. You can see there's a pattern of general gradual accumulation of change over time. And this worldview came to be called gradualism, and it was basically conventional wisdom in paleontology for about 100 years. In the 1970s, two young paleontologists, Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould, argued this was fundamentally wrong. And instead, the fossil record did not show this pattern of gradual, steady divergence. Most species, they argued, once they appear in the fossil record, don't change much, and they call that stasis. These are the vertical lines on the figure on the right. The changes that do occur, they argued, were associated with splitting events or the forming of new species, the sort of horizontal pulses on that figure. And this view of punctuated equilibrium was very controversial. And one of the reasons why the controversial was really lingering was that it wasn't always easy to decide which of these interpretations was better. The same data looked gradual to some people, but pulsed or punctuated to others. And there's no real good way to decide among the two. So for the past several years now, I've been working on sort of a general framework for evaluating how well different kinds of evolutionary patterns are fit by different explanations. In this context, three particular evolutionary models or evolutionary patterns were seen to be particularly important. On the left, we have Darwin's gradual directional change. That example shows shape change in a single-celled organism, in the shell of it, shown above. On the right, we have the other extreme of stasis, which is just small fluctuations around a steady mean. The example is from a fossil scallop shell. Now, the middle panel shows an intermediate model that's called a random walk. And random walks are not directional. They don't go any specific direction, but they do get accumulated over time. And that example is from shell width of a land snail. So, in sort of to get a first pass understanding of what the fossil record is telling us about these different evolutionary patterns, what I did was take each of these three models and fit to all the data sets I can find in the published paleontological record, and simply see how often each of these was best supported. The upshot is that steady, gradual directional change is very seldom observed in the fossil record. Only 5% of the roughly 250 cases I looked at was this the best supported model. The remaining 95% are split roughly half-half between random walks and stasis. So at the first pass, the fossil record does not reveal overall gradual steady divergence. It's much more a story of meandering or small fluctuating chains of stasis. So this is sort of not so much a specific method, but a general framework for evaluating different kinds of hypotheses. And with my last minute and a half or so, I just want to touch on a couple of other kinds of questions that can be addressed in this general framework. So you can also look at hypotheses of punctuated change. And this is an example from features of a trilobite lineage showing time on the horizontal axis. And you can see there's basically fluctuations of stasis, a pulsed increase, and then more fluctuations or return to stasis. And this kind of model can be evaluated, and its amount of evidence for it can be interpreted just like the three models I showed on the previous slide. Second example comes from a fossil stickleback lineage. This is a stickleback fish shown in the picture there. And what this figure shows is a reduction in the spininess of these fish. That's what the vertical axis there is how spiny these fish are. Time is on the horizontal axis. And you can see the reduction in spininess is initially very rapid, but then it kind of tapers. And it turns out that's exactly the pattern one expects to see when a population is adapting to new environmental conditions. So this lineage shows exactly what Darwin hoped to see in the fossil record. This is the transformation of a species by natural selection over time. In fact, this is the only example I know of in the fossil record where we can make a good claim for that's the case. Finally, in a number of sort of ostracode groups, so ostracodes are small crustaceans, so they're related to shrimp and crabs. They also happen to be the fossils I study. But in a number of different groups, you can see in the deep sea that they got systematically bigger over the last 40 or 50 million years. This is one example from one genus, where the small specimen on the left is from typical size of about 40 million years ago, and the much larger specimen on the right is about how big these critters are in the present day. You could use methods like that I've been talking about today to show that this is actually a real trend. They truly do get systematically larger over the last 40 or 50 million years. Moreover, you can also show that the increases in body size are actually correlated with and probably driven by long-term climate changes. As the ocean has cooled systematically over the last 40 million years, these individuals have gotten much larger in response to that cooling for reasons that are not well understood. That's my time. The question was, how many generations do you have to, how much time have to elapse for you to be able to detect these trends? And that's sort of the key issue, is Darwin was right about a lot of things, but he's wrong about how quick natural selection will evolve populations. And the reason, I think, the main reason we don't see lots of steady directional trends in the fossil record is we seldom have the fine enough resolution to do it. And that stickleback example is remarkable because it comes from a varved lake deposit, and there's actually annual resolution in those sediments. The practical resolution is like 100 years or so. But the reason we can see that trend there is because we have such incredibly good and unusually good temporal resolution.